You have experienced or will experience the end of a relationship. The pain of grief is inevitable, but does it need to be unbearable? How do you deal with the pain of grief after a relationship ends without falling into the traps of false hope and projections of the past? Discover how to understand your emotions, let go of what no longer has a place, and begin a new cycle. Grief after love can be more transformative than you imagine. Stay with us to find out how. The end of a relationship doesn't choose its time, place, or your emotional readiness. It could be that promising 2-month relationship or a 15-year marriage that had been silently dragging on. The time doesn't matter. When something important ends, your chest tightens just the same. The pain of a breakup is universal, knocking on everyone's door sooner or later. And the most curious thing, even when you know the relationship no longer made sense, the emptiness it leaves remains, like an echo of everything that was projected. The idea of a future together is what hurts the most when it's dismantled. You might have a million reasons to break up, rationalize 1,000 times that it was the best thing to do, but your emotions seem not to have gotten the memo. There's that internal delay, as if your body is still living a daily life that no longer exists. A simple example: how many times have you caught yourself wanting to share news with your ex before remembering that space no longer exists? It's an automatic gesture, almost childlike, but it says a lot about how the heart is slower than the mind. And that's absolutely human. This emotional confusion is part of the process, even when the decision to end things was clear. In fact, even the person who initiated the breakup can experience this grief. It's not because they took the initiative that they're immune. Sometimes that person also suffers for everything lost along the way. Not just the other person, but the version of themselves that existed in that relationship. And that's where things start to gain layers. It's not just about the absence of the other person, but the deconstruction of who we were together. And as much as it seems like the end, it's in this dismantling that the next step is born. But first comes a pain that needs to be understood in 2 dimensions. When a relationship ends, the pain doesn't come in just one package. It presents itself in different forms. There's the pain that's part of the process, a necessary pain that somehow prepares us for something new. This pain is almost like an internal cleansing. It hurts, but it also transforms. And that's vital to moving forward. It's the pain that leads us to reflection, self-knowledge, understanding who we really are beyond the relationships we've had. It weakens us, but at the same time makes us stronger. This pain comes from the need to say goodbye to a part of ourselves that, until then, was intimately connected to the other person. And like any change, it's uncomfortable, but needs to be felt so we can grow. On the other hand, there's that pain that's purely unnecessary. That pain that feeds on our negative thoughts, on what could have been different, what was missing, and what didn't happen. It's more like a psychological weight that seems endless, and the more you turn things over, the more it grows, the darker it gets. It's the pain that becomes a cycle, becoming blacker than black. A suffering that justifies itself, but has no real basis. This type of pain comes from emotional confusion, from lack of clarity. It's a whirlwind of feelings and thoughts that make you believe you won't be able to get out of there, when in fact, you're already getting out. It's just that your brain is still stuck in this place of non-acceptance. This unnecessary pain, as engaging as it may be, is totally avoidable. It's like a mental prison, where you start to believe you're being consumed by it. But if you can differentiate between the 2 pains, you'll realize there's a big difference between feeling the pain of transformation and getting lost in pain that leads nowhere. And most importantly, necessary pain is temporary, while unnecessary pain can last a long time if you don't become aware of what's happening. But how do you deal with this? The key is in how you view this process. Necessary pain, though difficult, has an essential function. It teaches us. To move forward, it's crucial that we accept it, that we experience it fully. Ignoring or trying to mask this pain is like trying to block the flow of a river. At some point, it will break the dam. True healing comes from allowing this pain to enter our field of experience. And no, this doesn't mean drowning in it. It means understanding that at some point, it's necessary for transformation to happen. It's as if each tear, each moment of despair, is a piece of the puzzle of who you can still become. By accepting it, you find strength in your vulnerabilities. But unnecessary pain, oh, that's much more treacherous. It disguises itself in many faces. It presents itself as regret, resentment, or even as the fear of moving forward. And instead of making room for transformation, it stays there, dragging on, feeding on insecurities. This happens because often we try to fight it in the wrong way, trying to reason and understand what isn't meant to be understood. When you catch yourself creating alternative stories about what could have been, the pain begins to take over your mind more intensely. And this suffering, though real, doesn't have the depth of necessary pain. It doesn't teach, it only consumes. The secret is to identify when pain begins to consume you and learn to question it. It may be difficult at first, but when you begin to observe your own thoughts and notice the difference between what is transforming you and what's holding you back, peace begins to emerge. This doesn't mean the pain will disappear, but you'll start to find ways to deal with it without it stealing your energy. The control here is in perception, in choosing not to feed unnecessary pain anymore. And now the next part of this process is crucial. How will you break free from this cycle? When we're in the midst of grief, it's common to fall into the trap of idealization. The mind often tries to convince us that if the relationship had continued, the pain would have been less. This arises because we begin to focus on the idea of what if. And what if is a dangerous trap, as it creates a distorted version of reality. The pain of the breakup seems unbearable, so our mind tries to seek an alternative that seems less painful, as if the continuity of the relationship were the magical solution. But the truth is that if the relationship had endured, we probably would have continued to face the same challenges, the same unresolved tensions. It's essential to remember that often what hurts us is not just the end of the relationship, but the things we couldn't resolve within it. The mind tries to soften the suffering through this idealization, but it doesn't allow us to see that the pain would only be postponed, not avoided. In practice, what would really have happened if the relationship had continued would be the prolongation of suffering, with more frustrations, more emotional distance, and, perhaps, an even more painful end in the future. The mind tries to protect us with these illusions, but it only keeps us stuck in the past, preventing true liberation. Understanding this requires courage, as it challenges us to face reality without masks. The end of a relationship, despite the pain it brings, is an opportunity for a new beginning. You need to accept that if the breakup happened, it's because that relationship was no longer the best choice for both. Therefore, questioning this deceptive thought that continuing would have been easier is essential to move forward. Have you ever stopped to think if actually the best was happening precisely at the moment you separated? Now, this reflection can open doors to understanding the true nature of grief. Grief doesn't just happen when there's a physical separation between two people, but also when the emotional connection is lost within a relationship. Often, the relationship has already died, but we continue to drag its remains, as if it were a passing phase. What happens in this case is that, even though the two are physically together, emotionally the distancing has already occurred some time ago. This type of grief is silent, often unrecognized, but it's equally devastating. The two people live in the same house, but no longer share the same feelings, the same complicity, and the weight of this is felt, even if it's not verbalized. The pain in this scenario is subtle, but constant. It's like living in an endless cycle where emotional needs continue to go unmet, but the relationship itself becomes just a convenience. Many people don't realize this type of grief is occurring until they reach a point where there's no more denying it. They feel the absence of something essential, genuine connection, and that's when the pain begins to manifest, not in the ending, but in the slow death of something that no longer exists, but is still being carried as a burden. The key in this case is to allow yourself to recognize that grief is already there, even without a formal separation. One of the greatest difficulties is admitting that the relationship no longer serves the purpose of uniting two people in a healthy way. Recognizing this is a painful but necessary first step. And in doing so, the next step is to understand what was lost and what needs to be healed within yourself before moving forward. What we learn from this experience can be vital to rebuilding something more meaningful in the future. The pain of a relationship ending can seem overwhelming, but there's something powerful that can be done in the midst of this turmoil: the practice of gratitude for yourself. Instead of getting lost in negative thoughts or blame, it's essential to look inward and recognize your own courage. The fact that you're facing the pain, seeking to learn from it and move forward, is already a great achievement. Self-gratitude doesn't mean ignoring the pain or pretending everything is okay. On the contrary, it involves recognizing that you're dealing with a difficult situation, and, even so, allowing yourself to learn and grow. It can be difficult to see your own value during this process. Often, when focusing on the end of a relationship, we forget everything we've already achieved on our own. It's necessary to start paying attention to small daily victories. The simple act of getting out of bed, having a healthy meal, talking with a friend, or taking a step to move forward should be celebrated. Each movement, no matter how small it seems, is a sign of inner strength, and by recognizing this, you begin to build a cycle of healing and renewal. However, gratitude is not limited to a simple recognition of what has already been overcome. It's also linked to the future. By thanking yourself, you're not just honoring the past, but also preparing for new opportunities that will arise. True transformation comes from realizing that the end of a cycle is, in fact, the beginning of a new one. If you can focus on what you've learned and the qualities you've developed during the process, you'll be stronger for the next phases of life. And so pain is transformed into fuel for evolution. Overcoming the end of a relationship is, without a doubt, an immense challenge. But true transformation only happens when we're able to reflect on the patterns that led us to that point and commit to not repeating them. After all, the most powerful lessons aren't in external circumstances, but in the choices we made along the way. When you begin to realize that many of the pains and difficulties experienced may have come from repetitive behaviors or patterns, the focus shifts from just the pain of the breakup to the opportunity for evolution. The first step for this is to recognize which patterns repeat in your love life. Do you always get involved with people with the same characteristics? Or maybe you sacrifice too much, trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved? These patterns may be deeply rooted in you, but it's possible to break them. When you realize that each relationship is a chance to do things differently, you begin to build a new path based on awareness and learning. And this requires courage, the courage to look at the past without fear and to understand that, yes, there's something to learn from each experience. However, breaking these patterns doesn't simply mean avoiding certain situations or people. It's an internal process of transformation, of self-knowledge, and of creating new habits and attitudes. Each time you see yourself repeating a behavior, take a deep breath, analyze the reason behind it, and seek a different response. For example, if you tend to choose partners who don't value you, it's important to reflect on what makes you accept this. Significant changes come when change begins within you, not outside. Only then can you truly build healthier and more satisfying relationships in the future. After a relationship ends, many people think they're ready to move on, but at the same time, a persistent hope of reconciliation appears. It can be a disconcerting feeling, especially when you're sure that the decision to move forward is the most correct one. This feeling that perhaps something can still be fixed isn't merely a matter of desire, but is often related to a psychological projection. In other words, you may be projecting an idealized version of the person, or even of the relationship, that doesn't correspond to the reality of the facts. This phenomenon occurs because unconsciously we attribute to the other person qualities and desires that are, in fact, our own. The projected animus, or anima, as Carl Jung explains, are internal images of masculine and feminine qualities that we seek in another person. When the relationship ends, we can still cling to this projection, believing that the other represents something that, in reality, needs to be reframed within ourselves. For example, you may feel that you still need this person to feel complete, because you project onto them an idea of happiness or completeness that you should ultimately find within yourself. This persistent hope of reconciliation often comes from the difficulty of accepting that the person you idealized is not the same as the one who exists in reality. The key here is to realize that projection is happening, and with that, begin to dialogue symbolically with this projected animus or anima. Instead of clinging to the illusion that reconciliation can heal the pain, recognize that healing lies in deconstructing this projection and looking at the real person, at the real relationship, and thus realizing that reconciliation, deep down, isn't what's really necessary for your transformation. The myth of Pandora, although involving many elements, brings a powerful lesson about the illusions we carry. According to the story, Pandora, upon opening a box given by Zeus, released all evils upon the world, but in the end, hope remained. This detail is essential because hope often remains as an illusion that keeps us tied to the past. In the context of a relationship ending, this hope is like Pandora's box, something that may seem to bring comfort, but that, in reality, prevents us from moving forward. It sustains itself through the projection of an ideal that no longer exists. When we cling to this hope, believing that reconciliation or a sudden change can happen, we are, in fact, feeding an illusion that is maintained by our unconscious mind. The projection of an idealized relationship with the promise of a happy ending or redemption prevents us from seeing reality as it really is. Just like Pandora, by releasing hope from the box, we allow ourselves to continue believing in something that no longer has foundation, hindering our process of healing and adapting to a new life cycle. This projection can be a defense mechanism against pain, but it can also keep us stuck to something that no longer has purpose. To understand the Pandora myth in our lives, we need to stop seeing hope as a force that should keep us tied to what was, and start seeing it as an opportunity to build a new future. Hope, in this case, should be directed inward, no longer hoping that the other will change or return, but believing in our ability to rebuild ourselves and create new paths. Only then can we understand that true hope lies in looking to the future with a new perspective, free from the projections that keep us tied to the past. The process of freeing oneself from the projection of a past relationship and its illusory hope involves a deep and symbolic internal dialogue. When you realize that the projected animus or anima is a distorted representation of reality, the next step is to establish a dialogue with that part of yourself. Imagine that instead of trying to force a reconciliation, you can talk to this projection internally, recognizing that it no longer corresponds to the real person with whom you had a relationship. This dialogue doesn't need to be literal, but symbolic, through meditations, reflections, or even therapeutic writing, allowing you to connect with the parts of yourself that still seek this idealized love. When you dedicate yourself to talking with this internal projection, you begin to realize that it's part of a process of self-discovery and healing. You learn to distinguish between reality and what was idealized, and to understand that the true relationship is no longer with the other, but with yourself. This symbolic process can be painful, but it's necessary to restore mental and emotional clarity. For example, By writing a letter to your ex-partner that you'll never send, you can begin to understand unresolved feelings and, at the same time, deconstruct the projections that remain active in your mind. This practice of symbolic dialogue is a form of inner reconciliation where you learn to see the other as they really are and to free yourself from unrealistic expectations. Thus, by integrating this internal part that represents the projected animus or anima, you create a new relationship with yourself. Instead of depending on the other's resolution, you become the key to your own healing. This is the final step to freeing yourself from illusory hope and living a more authentic and fulfilling life without ties to a past that no longer exists. Now that you better understand how to deal with the pain of grief after a relationship ends, the big question is, how will you apply this knowledge in your life? Pain doesn't have to be a weight you carry forever, and the transformation it can generate is in your hands. So, how about starting today to look at what really matters? Have you noticed how your patterns and projections influence your emotions? Let's talk about it in the comments. Tell me what you're feeling or what would help you better understand this process. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning about this and other deep topics that can change your life. Oh, and there's a really interesting video in the end screen that can help you take the next step in your transformation journey. Click there to check it out.